Hello and welcome to the Prelims Practice session for the upcoming preliminary examination. Now this video is in continuation with our series of discussion on the questions related to important subjects and also current affairs. And in these videos we have been setting up questions based on the questions that have been asked in the previous years in the preliminary examination. Now this video is the second part of the economy section out of the total 3 economy videos which will be released. And in this video we'll be discussing some important topics like banking and finance, inflation and external sector. And also we'll look at some important questions related to important terms in the economy which have been in news. Now after this it needs to be reiterated that you need to practice more number of questions, and for that you can always subscribe to the prelims test series. So keep practicing and all the best for the upcoming preliminary examination. So let us start the discussion now. Now the first few questions that we are going to discuss here are related to the banking and the finance sector. So in this regard, let us first look at the previous year questions and the way UPSC has asked questions related to this section of the economy. And after that, we will discuss some practice questions based on those previous year questions. Now in the banking sector, the types of questions are sometimes related to the new types of banks that are being introduced in the Indian economy. Then again, some questions are related to the crisis in the banking and the finance sector and the various initiatives and decisions that are taken by the Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India for improving the banking and finance in India. And also, questions are asked related to the measures for financial inclusion. So now if you look at this question that was asked in the year 2018, it reads, with reference to the governance of the public sector banking in India, consider the following statements. First is that the capital infusion in public sector banks by the Government of India has steadily increased in the last decade. And the second statement is that to put the public sector banks in order, the merger of associate banks with the parent State Bank of India has been effected. Now this type of question is particularly related to the steps taken by the Government of India and also the steps taken by the State Bank of India to improve the banking sector in India. So in this regard, this first statement is incorrect because the capital infusion into the public sector banks has not steadily increased. However, it has fluctuated in the past 10 years. However, the second statement is correct because recently the State Bank of India had effected the merger of its associate banks. And this was mainly intended to improve the banking sector. So the correct answer here was B, that is 2 only. So this particular question was related to the initiatives that are taken to improve the banking and finance in India. Again, if you look at these 3 questions, this question was asked in the year 2017 and it is related to the purpose of setting up of small finance banks in India. So first is to supply the credit to the small business units. Second is to supply credit to small and marginal farmers. And the third is to encourage young entrepreneurs to set up business, particularly in rural areas. Now this was not one of the objectives of setting up of the small finance banks. And the correct answer here was A, that is 1 and 2 only. Again, the question that was asked in the year 2016 was related to the core banking solutions term, which is sometimes seen in the news. And the question asked, which of the following statements best describes or describe this term? So the first statement, that is, it is a network of banks branches which enables customers to operate their accounts from any branch of the bank on its network, regardless of where they open their accounts, was the only correct statement which defines the core banking solutions. And hence the correct answer here was A, that is 1 only. Again, if you look at the another question that was asked in 2016, it was related to the establishment of payment banks. The question reads, the establishment of payment banks is being allowed in India to promote financial inclusion. Which of the following statements is or are correct in this context? Now the first statement is that the mobile telephone companies and supermarket chains that are owned and controlled by the residents are eligible to be promoters of the payment banks. Second is that the payment banks can issue both credit cards and debit card, which was an incorrect statement related to the payment banks. And the third statement, that the payment banks cannot undertake lending activities, is a correct statement because these payment banks can only accept the demand deposit and they are not allowed to do lending activities. Also, the first statement given here was correct, that the mobile telephone companies and supermarket chains were allowed to be promoters of payment banks, and hence the correct answer here was B, that is 1 and 3 only. So by solving these previous year questions, we come to note that important terms that are in news related to the banking sector are important. If any kind of new bank is being set up in India, so the main purpose and the objectives and the activities that these banks are going to undertake are also important. Again, various measures and steps that are taken by the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India for setting the banking sector and the finance sector in order are also important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, after going through these previous year questions, let us look at this practice question, which is related to the non-banking finance companies. Now, we know that the non-banking finance companies or the NBFCs are important pillar of the finance system in India. And this particular section of the finance sector is facing issues because of the recent crisis which happened due to the IL and FS, and that led to a liquidity crisis in the NBFC sector. So in this context, it is very important for us to know about the basics of the NBFC sectors and how they differ from the normal banks. So the question reads, which of the following statements is or are correct about the non-banking finance companies? First is that the deposits in the NBFCs are insured up to rupees 5 lakh by the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation. Second is that all the NBFCs are required to follow the SLR and the CRR norms which are mandated by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, if you go through the prelims compass of the economy, you will find a comparison has been provided between the banks and the NBFCs. And in this question, if you look at this first statement is based on the deposits in the banking sector which are insured by the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation. And this limit of insurance up to rupees 5 lakh was recently increased from rupees 1 lakh by an RBI order. And the issue of insurance of the deposits was in news related to the PMC banking crisis that happened in Maharashtra. So do not get confused by such statements, because although the deposit insurance was in news related to the PMC crisis, however, this is not related to the NBFC sector. And in this regard, this first statement is incorrect, because deposits up to rupees 5 lakh are only insured for the banking sector and not for the NBFCs. And the deposits in the banking sector are insured by the Deposit Insurance and the Credit Guarantee Corporation. Again, if you look at the second statement, it is also incorrect, because there are no CRR norms for the NBFCs. And even the SLR norms are only applicable to those NBFCs which are deposit taking NBFCs. So this second statement is also incorrect here. So the correct answer that comes out is D, that is neither the statement 1 nor the statement 2 are correct. So again, do go through the prelims compass of economy and learn about these important differences between the banks and the NBFCs or the non-banking finance companies, and also various other important current affairs and the core sections that have been provided related to the banking and the finance sector. With this, let's take up next question now. Now, the second question is related to the requirements that are required to be followed by the banks to handle the liquidity stress. And if you look at the previous year questions, you will find that this question was asked in the year 2018, and it was related to capital adequacy ratio. So this question reads, consider the following statements that the capital adequacy ratio is the amount that the banks have to maintain in the form of their own funds to offset any loss that the banks incur if the account holders fail to repay their dues. Now, if you go through the definition of the capital adequacy ratio, it is the ratio of a bank's capital in relation to its risk-weighted assets and the current liabilities. And it is mainly aimed at offsetting any loss that the bank might incur if the account holders fail to repay their dues. And hence this first statement given here is correct. However, the second statement that CAR is decided by each individual bank is incorrect, because this CAR ratio is decided by the central banks. And in case of India, it is decided by the Reserve Bank of India. So the correct answer was A, that is 1 only. So after this, let us look at this question, and it is related to the liquidity coverage ratio. So the question reads, which of the following statements is or are correct about the liquidity coverage ratio or the LCR? So the first statement is that it is the minimum required high quality liquid assets that the banks must hold to allow them to survive a liquidity stress for 30 days. Second is that it was introduced as a part of the Basel III norms. And the third statement is that high quality liquid assets includes the cash that banks are required to set aside under the RBI mandated cash reserve ratio. Now, in this regard, if you look at the definition of the liquidity coverage ratio, it is actually the minimum required high quality liquid assets that the banks must hold to allow them to survive a liquidity stress for 30 days. Now, what are these high quality liquid assets? So, these are those assets which can be easily converted into liquid cash. And some of the high quality liquid assets include cash which is lying with the banks, which is outside the CRR requirements. Again, gold is considered a high quality liquid assets. Also, those government securities which are lying outside the SLR requirements for the banks are also considered as high quality liquid assets. And again, the high rated corporate bonds are also considered HQLA. However, recently the Reserve Bank of India has provided an exception that if out of the 18.25% SLR requirement, if a bank is holding 17% of these requirements as government securities, they will be considered as high quality liquid assets. And this LCR ratio has been mandated or introduced as a part of the Basel III norms. Now, if you look at this third statement, these high quality liquid assets do not include the cash that the banks are required to set aside under the CRR ratio. However, it can include cash which is lying with the banks outside the CRR ratio is considered as high quality liquid assets, and hence the third statement given here is incorrect and the first and the second statements are correct. So the correct answer that comes out here is B, that is 1 and 2 only. So by solving these questions, we identify that various initiatives by the Reserve Bank of India and the Basel III norms which target the liquidity scenario for the banks and also aim at reducing the risks in the banking sector due to the lending activities are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And again, various such kind of initiatives that have been announced in the past 1 year have been included in the prelims compass of Indian economy. So do go through that to improve your knowledge of these particular aspects. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now, this next question is related to one of the important news of this year related to the Indian economy, and that was the operation twist of the Reserve Bank of India. And if you look at this previous year question, you will find that it was asked in the year 2016, and it was related to another important initiative of the Reserve Bank of India to improve the liquidity scenario in the Indian economy. So this question reads, what is or are the purpose or the purposes of the marginal cost of funds based lending rate, or the MCLR, which is announced by the Reserve Bank of India? So in this, the first statement that is given here, that is, these guidelines help improve the transparency in the methodology followed by the banks for determining the interest rates on advances, is a correct statement. And second is that these guidelines will help ensure availability of bank credit at interest rates which are fair to the borrowers as well as the banks, which is also a correct statement. Now, recently you might be knowing that the Reserve Bank of India has introduced a new way of improving the monetary policy transmission, and that is known as external benchmarking of the interest rates. So in the prelims compass of Indian economy, this new concept of external benchmarking of the interest rates has also been discussed in detail. And that also stands as one of the most important topic for this year's preliminary examination. And in this line, the correct answer here is C, that is both the statements 1 and 2 are correct. So after this, let us look at this question related to another important news related to economy, that is the operation twist of the Reserve Bank of India. First is that it is a special open market operation employed by the Reserve Bank of India for the first time. And the second statement is that it aims at bringing down the rates of interest on long-term loans. So now, before solving this question, let us understand the operation twist of the Reserve Bank of India. So if you learn about this operation twist, it is a special open market operation which has been employed by the Reserve Bank of India for the first time in its monetary policy. Now, this open market operation is different from the normal repo lending which is allowed under the liquidity adjustment facility. And under these open market operations, there is buying and selling of the government securities. Now, how it is different from the normal open market operations? Now, it is different because it normally involves simultaneous buying and selling of the long-term and the short-term government securities. And this is primarily done in order to influence the interest rates. Now, in this regard, we note that open market operations involve the buying and selling of the government securities in order to manage the liquidity in the economy. However, the only thing which makes the operation twist unique is that it involves simultaneous buying and selling of long-term and the short-term government securities. So under this operation twist, the Reserve Bank of India will be purchasing the long-term government securities, and at the same time it will be selling the short-term government securities. Now, the main purpose of the operation twist is that it would bring down the rate of interest on the long-term loans and it will increase the rate of interest on short-term loans. So, the basic purposes are to moderate the interest rates of long-term securities and to bring monetary policy transmission. Now, to understand the functioning of this operation twist of the Reserve Bank of India, you can go through the economic survey videos which are available on the YouTube. And in these economic survey videos, various aspects of the economic survey which are important from the exam point of view have been discussed in detail. So do go through those videos and try and understand the different aspects of the operation twist and other important topics. So now if we look at this question, the first statement that is given, that is, it is a special open market operation employed by the Reserve Bank of India for the first time, is a correct statement. And the second statement, that it aims at bringing down the rate of interest on long-term loans, is also correct because it is one of the purposes of the operation twist. And hence the correct answer here would be C, that is both the statements 1 and 2 are correct. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now this fourth question is related to another important term that has been in news, that is the monetary policy corridor. And the question reads, consider the following statements about the monetary policy corridor. The first is that it is a system which the RBI currently uses for the liquidity management. And second is that in India, monetary policy corridor refers to the difference between the repo rate and the marginal standing facility rate. Now, if you learn about the monetary policy corridor, you will learn that it is the area between the lower reverse repo rate and the upper ceiling rate of the marginal standing facility. And we normally note that the reverse rate is a rate below the repo rate. However, the marginal standing facility rate stands at above the normal repo lending operation. Now, normally the difference between the repo rate and the marginal standing facility stands at about 25 basis points, and the difference between the repo rate and the reverse repo rate also stands at a difference of about 25 basis points. That is, the reverse repo rate is 25 basis points below the repo rate. And according to the monetary policy corridor, it is the area between the reverse repo rate and the marginal standing facility rate. So this area stands at about 50 basis points. However, recently the Reserve Bank of India has decided to widen this monetary policy corridor, and it has decided to increase the difference between the repo rate and the reverse repo rate by 40 basis points. So this makes the monetary policy corridor of about 65 basis points. So the marginal standing facility rate and the reverse repo rate determine the corridor for daily movement in the weighted average call money rate. And according to the monetary policy of the Reserve Bank of India, ideally this call rate should travel within the corridor, showing a comfortable liquidity situation in the financial system and the economy. And due to the COVID-19, the RBI has decided for widening this monetary policy rate corridor. Now, this monetary policy corridor structure for policy rate helps the RBI in guiding its monetary policy operations. So now if you try to solve this question, you will find that it is a system which the RBI currently uses for its liquidity management, which is a correct statement. However, the second statement given here is incorrect because it refers to the difference between the reverse repo rate and the marginal standing facility rate. So the correct answer is A, that is 1 only. And presently this monetary policy corridor area has been increased from the 50 basis points difference to 65 basis points difference. And this has been done by further lowering the difference between the repo rate and the reverse repo rate from 25 to 40 basis points. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now, this fifth question is related to another important current affair, which is related to the consolidated sinking fund, which is sometimes seen in the news. And the question reads, consider the following statements about the consolidated sinking fund. The first statement is, investment by the state governments in this fund is mandatory. And second is that the consolidated sinking funds are maintained by the state governments with the Reserve Bank of India. Now, to understand this consolidated sinking fund, you should note that the state governments maintain these consolidated sinking fund and the guarantee redemption funds with the Reserve Bank of India as buffers for the repayment of their liabilities. And currently, the state governments can avail special drawing facility from the Reserve Bank against the collateral of these funds in CSF and GRF, which are the consolidated sinking fund and the guarantee redemption funds. Now, normally the rate of interest which is charged by the Reserve Bank of India is 100 basis points below the normal repo rate, and it is at 1% below the repo rate that the ways and means and advances are extended to the state governments by the Reserve Bank of India. However, in order to further incentivize adequate maintenance of these funds by the state governments and to encourage them to increase the corpus of these funds, the RBI has decided to lower the rate of interest on the special drawing facility from 100 basis points below the repo rate to 200 basis points below the repo rate. Now, an important thing that should be noted about this scheme is that it is presently voluntary in nature for all the states. However, most of the states maintain consolidated sinking funds with the Reserve Bank of India. So now if you try to solve this question, you will find that this first statement given here is incorrect because the investments by the state governments in the consolidated sinking fund is not mandatory and it is voluntary in nature. And these consolidated sinking funds are maintained by the state governments with the Reserve Bank of India. And these funds act as buffers for the repayment of the liabilities of the state governments. And hence it is very important from exam point of view. So the correct answer that comes out is B, that is 2 only. So the two questions that we have discussed related to the monetary policy corridor and the consolidated sinking fund are important current affairs of this year related to the decisions of the RBI and various important aspects in Indian economy. And they can be very important for us from exam point of view. So keep an eye on them and try and understand more details about these from the prelims compass of Indian economy. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now, the next question that we are going to discuss here is based on another important section in the Indian economy, which is the inflation. So before solving this question, let us look at the previous year questions related to the inflation that have been asked in the UPSC examination. So if you look at this question, it was asked in the year 2015 and it reads, with reference to the inflation in India, which of the following statements is or are correct? So first is the controlling the inflation in India is the responsibility of the government of India only, which is incorrect because it is both the responsibility of the central government as well as the Reserve Bank of India. Second is that the Reserve Bank of India has no role in controlling the inflation, which is also incorrect. So after this, we are left with only two options. And in these two, if you look at the C option, it reads decrease money circulation helps in controlling the inflation. And the D option reads increase money circulation helps in controlling the inflation. Now in this, if there is decreased money circulation, the spending power of the people will be decreased. And if the spending power of the people will be decreased, it will lead to decrease in the demand. And when there is decrease in the demand, it leads to fall in the prices of articles. And hence the correct answer here is C, that is decreased money circulation helps in controlling the inflation. Now the opposite of this is the option D, which reads increased money supply. So when there is increased money circulation, there will be more purchasing power with the people. And hence when there will be more money to spend, the demand of the products will increase substantially. And hence it will not lead to controlling the inflation, rather it will boost inflation. So the correct answer was C. Now, if you look at these previous year questions, these are also related to inflation, and two questions were asked in the year 2013 and one question was asked in the year 2011. So the first question that was asked in 2013 read, which one of the following is likely to be the most inflationary in its effect? Now in this, the clear answer that comes out is creating new money to finance a budget deficit. And by doing so, the government will put more money in the hands of the people, and that will increase their spending power. And once the spending power increases, it leads to more demand, and as a result, the prices of the commodities rise and inflation increases. And this measure is particularly inflationary because it adds more amount of money into the economy, or it increases the liquidity into the economy. Again, if you look at this second question, it reads, consider the following statements. The first is that inflation benefits the debtors, and the second is that the inflation benefits the bond holders. Now, if you look at the impact of the inflation in an economy, you will find that when there is high inflation, it leads to the decline in the real interest rates. And this real interest rate is calculated by subtracting from the prevailing interest rates the inflation percentage. So, for example, if the nominal interest rate, which is the prevailing interest rate, is about 10% and the inflation is about 5%, then the real interest rate is only 5%. So the people who have lent their money will not get much benefit. However, the people who have borrowed will benefit from this. And that is why inflation normally benefits the debtors. However, the bond holders in this case do not benefit from the inflation. And hence the correct answer is A, that is 1 only. And if you look at this question that was asked in 2011, it reads, economic growth is usually coupled with. Now, normally the economic growth is coupled with inflation. However, when this economic growth is very high, then it leads to hyperinflation at times. However, when the economic growth is very low, it can also lead to deflation. But normally, the economic growth is coupled with inflation. So the most appropriate answer here would be inflation. Now, if you look at this practice question, it reads, which of the following statements is or are correct about inflation in an economy? Now, the first statement is that inflation helps in achieving growth in an economy. Second is that stagflation refers to a situation of high inflation and high unemployment in an economy. And the third statement is that high inflation in an economy makes exports attractive. So if you look at this first statement, it reads, inflation helps in achieving growth in an economy. Now this is a general statement and hence this stands correct because normally inflation is required for growth in an economy. However, if this inflation turns into hyperinflation, it will not be very good for the economic growth of the economy. Now, why inflation is required? Because it leads to higher income for the wage earners. And if the income is higher, it leads to more demand in the economy and hence it leads to more growth in the economy. And it is also vice versa as to if the prices rise and there is more demand, then the wages also rise. And hence both the inflation and growth feed each other. However, when this inflation gets into high inflation territory, only then it impacts or adversely starts impacting the growth of the economy. Thus, this statement, which is generic in nature that inflation helps in achieving growth in an economy, is correct statement. Again, the second statement that is given here is correct because stagflation refers to a situation of high inflation, which is coupled with high unemployment in an economy. So when the inflation is high in an economy, and when there is high unemployment, it is referred to as the stagflation. Then the third statement that is given here is incorrect because when there is high inflation in an economy, the price of production of the goods will be more as compared to the other countries. This is because the input cost for production will be more. And hence it will make the exports less competitive as compared to the products of other countries. Again, when the inflation is high in an economy, the producers try to sell their product domestically only. And further, as the input cost of production increases, it makes the products uncompetitive as compared to other economies. And hence it makes the exports unattractive. And thus high inflation in an economy makes the exports unattractive. And hence the correct answer that comes out is B, that is 1 and 2 only. Now, to further understand the impact of inflation on an economy, you should go through the prelims compass of Indian economy and where the major impacts of the inflation on different sectors have been explained. So do go through that section and increase your conceptual clarity related to the impact of inflation and also various other aspects of the inflation. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now, the next question is related to the external sector of India. And in this, the balance of payment is one of the important areas in the economy section. So if you look at the previous year questions, you will find that this question was asked in the year 2019. And this question reads, consider the following statements. The first is that most of India's external debt is owed by the governmental entities. And second is that all of the India's external debt is dominated in US dollars. Now, both these statements that are given in this question were incorrect. This is because most of the India's external debt is owed by the private sector and not by the governmental entities, and hence this first statement given here is incorrect. Again, if you look at the second statement, that is all of India's external debt is dominated in US dollars, it is also incorrect because India's external debt is dominated in different currencies, and not that all of India's external debt is dominated in US dollars. So again, the second statement given here is incorrect. So the correct answer that comes out is D, that is neither the statement 1 nor the statement 2 are correct. Now, after looking at this previous year question, if you look at this practice question, it reads, consider the following statements regarding the remittances. First is that China is the largest recipient of the remittances in the world, followed by India. Second is that in the current account of balance of payment, remittances are treated as invisibles. And the third statement is that Migration and Development Brief Report of OECD tracks remittances sent across the world. Now, in solving such kind of practice questions, you should always look for the incorrect statements first. So if you have an idea about the remittances from the world, you will find that India is the largest recipient of the remittances in the world. And hence the first statement that is given here is incorrect because China is the second largest recipient of the remittances. And India has recently surpassed China in terms of receiving of the remittances from the world. Now, this report has been provided by World Bank's Migration and Development Brief. So again, this third statement given here is also incorrect, that the Migration and Development Brief report is provided by the World Bank and is not provided by the OECD. So by knowing that these two statements are correct, you can easily eliminate the options A, B and D. So the only statement that comes out is C, that is, in the current account of balance of payment, the remittances are treated as invisible. Now, in this second statement, invisible refers to those transfers which do not involve physical movement of the goods. And these invisibles include the services, the transfers and the income that is earned by the companies which own the assets abroad. Now, transfers simply involve the money which is sent back by the migrant workers who are working outside India. And these are included in the invisible sections in the current account of balance of payment. And hence the second statement given here is correct, that the remittances are treated as invisibles and the goods which are exported physically are treated as visibles. So these are few aspects related to the external sector of the India, and you should always learn about the basic concepts of the current account deficit, the capital account deficit, the issue of balance of payment, and also important reports related to the balance of payment situation of India. With this, let's take up the next question now. Now, the next question is related to the important terms which are sometimes seen in the news. So now, before solving this question, let us look at the previous year questions related to such important terms which have been asked in the preliminary examination. Now, if you look at the preliminary examination paper of 2016, you will find that two such questions were asked. And the first question was related to the term import cover, which was sometimes seen in the news. Now, this term import cover is sometimes seen in the news in the context of balance of payment issue. And if you look at the options, you will find that it is the number of months of imports that could be paid by a country's international reserves. So in this case, the foreign exchange reserve, which is lying with the Reserve Bank of India, is an important thing which is related to the import cover. So the import cover in India's context would simply mean the number of months of imports that could be paid by the foreign exchange reserves, which is lying with the Reserve Bank of India. Again, if you look at this question, it reads, the term base erosion and profit shifting is sometimes seen in the news in the context of. So if you have learned about the base erosion and profit shifting and also the issue of transfer pricing, you will find that it is related to the curbing of tax evasion by multinational companies which move their operations into the tax havens. And details about this is given in your prelims compass. So do go through that. So again, let us look at this practice question. So it reads, the GAFA tax, which is sometimes seen in the news, is related to which of the following? The options are the carbon tax imposed by the government of India for controlling global warming. Second is the cess imposed by the central government for compensating the state governments for transition to GST regime. Again, it is a direct tax levied on the income accrued to foreign companies. And again, the last option is that it is a digital service tax imposed by France. Now you might be knowing that there are many multinational companies like Google, Amazon, etc., which have their operations in different countries, although they are based in only one country. And as such, because of their base operations, they pay taxes in only one country. However, they do not pay taxes in the countries in which they have the operations and where they are not registered. And hence, because of the digital services which are provided by these countries in the France has imposed the GAFA tax on Google, Amazon, and Facebook. And hence, the D option that is given here is correct. That is, it is a digital service tax which has been imposed by the France. Now, an equivalent of the GAFA tax which has been imposed by the France is the equalization levy which has been imposed by the India. So if you learn about the equalization tax, you will find that it is a tax which has been imposed on the digital transactions in the digital advertisement space. And it is a direct tax which has been imposed on the foreign e-commerce companies which are operating in India. So in this case, we learn that countries like France and India are imposing tax on the companies which are registered in the United States of America. However, they are earning their profits by functioning in the countries like France and India. So the GAFA tax is imposed on e-commerce companies which are registered in the United States of America. However, they are operating in France. And similarly, equalization levy is a tax which has been imposed by India on foreign e-commerce companies which are operating in India but are registered in United States of America. So with this, let's take up the next question now. Now the next question is related to the taxation in the economy section. And if you look at the previous year questions, you will find that in the year 2018, this question was related to the goods and services tax. So this reads, consider the following items: cereal grains hulled, chicken eggs cooked, fish processed and canned, and newspapers containing advertising material. Which of the above items is or are exempted under the goods and services tax? Now the GST on these products was continuously in news in the year 2017 and 18. And in this, the government had initially imposed 5% GST on the cereal grains hulled. However, after a point of time, the government had made it zero. And in this case, if you look at the options that are given, only 5% GST was imposed on the fish processed and canned, and all other were exempted. So according to the requirement of the question, the correct answer is C, that is 1, 2 and 4 only. Again, if you look at these questions, this was asked in the year 2018 and it reads, with reference to the India's decision to levy an equalization tax of 6% on online advertisement services offered by non-resident entities, which of the following statements is or are correct? First is that it is introduced as a part of the Income Tax Act, and second is that the non-resident entities that offer advertisement services in India can claim a tax credit in their home country under the double taxation avoidance agreements. Now, this equalization levy was introduced as a part of the Finance Act and it was not introduced as a part of the Income Tax Act, and hence the first statement given here was incorrect. Again, this equalization levy was outside the scope of the double taxation avoidance agreement, and again the second statement was also incorrect. So the correct answer here was D, that is neither the statement 1 nor the statement 2 are correct. Further, if you look at this question that was asked in 2017, it reads, what is or are the most likely advantages of implementing the goods and services tax? First is that it will replace multiple taxes collected by multiple authorities and will thus create a single market in India. Again, it will drastically reduce the current account deficit of India and will enable it to increase its foreign exchange reserves. And third is that it will enormously increase the growth and size of economy of India and will enable it to overtake China in the near future. Now, under the goods and services tax, all the indirect taxes have been subsumed, and hence it has replaced the multiple taxes which were earlier collected by multiple authorities, and hence it has created a single market. However, this third statement that is given here is ambiguous, that it will enormously increase the growth and size of economy of India and will enable it to overtake China in the near future. So don't fall for such statements. And if you know that this statement is incorrect, you can eliminate the options B, C and D. So the correct answer that comes out is A, that is 1 only. So by solving these questions, we find that questions related to important tax decisions of the Government of India and other important tax related decisions are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So now if you look at this question, it reads, consider the following statements about the Building and Other Construction Workers Fund. First is that it is a statutory fund constituted by Building and Other Construction Workers Act 1996. Second is that a cess is levied and collected by the central governments at the rate of 1% of the construction cost incurred by the employer. And third is that the proceeds of this fund can be used for welfare of all the workers. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? Now, this Building and Other Construction Workers Act provides safety, health and welfare measures for the building and other construction workers. And for this purpose, a cess is levied and collected at the rate of 1% of the cost of construction by all the state governments and not the central government. And this cess is collected under this act. So this proves that it is a statutory fund and the cess is not collected by the central government but is collected by the state government. So the second statement is incorrect. Again, the welfare schemes which are funded by the Building and Other Construction Workers Fund are exclusively for the building and the construction workers only. And as such, the proceeds of the fund cannot be used for the welfare of all workers, and hence the third statement is also incorrect. So the correct answer that comes out is 1 only. So this is one important fund which was in news and can be asked in your preliminary examination. Again, various other factors related to the taxation, their impacts and various important aspects of the taxation have been discussed in the prelims corpus of economy. So do go through that and try and understand important facts for us from the preliminary examination point of view. With this, let's take up the last question for today's discussion. Now this last question is regarding the external sector of India. And this question reads, which of the following is or are the likely benefits of internationalization of rupee? Now the debate regarding the internationalization of rupee has started in the background of inclusion of the Chinese currency renminbi into the special drawing rights basket of the International Monetary Fund. Again, various bonds are being allowed by the Reserve Bank of India, which is being seen as a sign of internationalization of rupee. So this question reads, which of the following is or are the likely benefits of internationalization of rupee? First is that it will facilitate greater integration of Indian economy with the world. Second is that it will reduce the dependency of foreign exchange reserves for balance of payment stability. And third is that it will help India surpass China in terms of economic growth rate. Now, when is a currency said to be internationalized? So a currency is said to be internationalized when other countries' banks and firms and citizens hold its currency for financial security. Now, for example, dollar is the most internationalized currency in the world. And majority of the banks, firms and citizens of different countries want to hold dollar for their financial security. Again, another feature of an internationalized currency is that the international currency markets trade actively in such currencies. So if you look at the international currency market, there is huge demand of dollar normally, and hence dollar is one of the most internationalized currency in the world. So now what could be the consequence of internationalization of Indian rupee? So if rupee is internationalized, we can pay for our imports in rupees, and that is because the banks, firms and citizens of other countries will start holding Indian currency, and as such the demand for Indian rupee might increase, and accordingly it will facilitate the greater integration of Indian economy with the world. So the first statement is correct. Further, as we note that when there is balance of payment crisis, the RBI releases its foreign exchange reserves to pay for such balance of payment crisis. However, if rupee is internationalized, India's dependency on the forex reserves for balance of payment stability will decrease drastically, and hence the second statement is also correct. However, the third statement is ambiguous here, and for India to surpass China in terms of economic growth rate, there are other important factors as well. So not necessarily the internationalization of rupee will help India surpass China in terms of economic growth rate. So the third statement is incorrect, and hence the correct answer that comes out is B, that is 1 and 2 only. So in this discussion, we have touched some important topics from the economy section related to the banking and finance, related to the external sector, and also important issues related to the inflation. So for a better understanding, do go through the Prelims Compass magazine, which is freely available on the eLearn platform. Again, do go through the economics survey videos which have been uploaded on the YouTube and are also available on eLearn. So keep watching videos and stay tuned for more videos which you can find on the eLearn platform and on YouTube.